Okay, it takes so long to start sometimes that I feel like I'm just waiting in empty air. But hello, everyone, and welcome back to our 11th episode of Finding Her Voice, about women who make film by the women who love film. I am Allison Johnson, and once again, I am joined by fellow movie and TV writer AJ Caulfield. Gabby will be sitting this month out, but will be back with us in April for what should be a fun discussion. For March, we did something a little different than usual, and rather than focus on a film directed by a woman, we chose two films to watch that were edited by women, although we'll be deviating a bit from the films themselves. But to kick things off, rather than kind of opening with a question like we have in the past, some big news happened this week about Joss Whedon wanting to direct, write, and produce a Batgirl picture. So it seems like every week there is some form of superhero news, but in this case, it's kind of having people react maybe a little stronger than usual. AJ, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about your thoughts on the news.
Yes. So we had talked a bit about, we are Joss Whedon fans. We don't think that he is a bad person. And I'm personally a big fan of Firefly. And I think that the stuff that he has done in the past has been awesome. But again, it's another situation where it's a male filmmaker taking what could be done by a woman, a woman's story, kind of taking that and turning it into something from a male's perspective. I do have high hopes for it. I'm hoping that it'll be really great, and I have some dream casting to discuss. There's some actresses I would like to see as Batgirl. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that I'm necessarily upset by the news. I wish that it could have gone to a female filmmaker. I think it would have made it something a little bit more special, kind of like with Wonder Woman, because I'm really psyched for that film. I think it'll be great. But I did make a discovery. Allie and I were talking about this before we started the podcast. Someone had found in Joss Whedon's Twitter likes, another person had tweeted, "What we need is a male version of Batgirl." And we're taking that as satire. We're hoping that it's satire. But if that's kind of the way that Joss Whedon really does feel about his interpretation of Batgirl, there might be trouble looming ahead. And I think that's kind of like the sum of my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wish I could be more optimistic. I don't think he would make a bad movie. I'll put that out there now. I think he understands how to make superhero films. I think he understands how to balance dark and light. I just can't stand the fact that he's placed himself in a position where he's called himself, a champion of feminism, a champion of female talent, and yet he's taking the reins on a picture that very easily could have gone to a female director and could have allowed somebody in a lesser position of power in the industry a chance to shine. He could have backed or produced a picture about Batgirl directed or written by a woman, and he just isn't. And that kind of just puts a bit of a sour note for me. But again, I certainly don't think he's going to create anything bad, and no. I hope that he would create something that's respectable. And again, I have dream casting as well, and I hope that follows through, and maybe the cast and the rest of the crew will be a diverse, eclectic group of people, and that will kind of make it better. But right now it is kind of a wait and see. But it just, again, to be white straight man in the industry who kind of uses feminism as a way to kind of bolster their own profile. I hope to see them actually show it in action and not just in words. So that's
not
kind
just
of
be the woke bae of
right. Don't just use it as your header.
Yeah, don't be like #feminist and just not do anything about that.
Don't just wear the he for she t-shirt, actually do something. So But yeah, so that's my only issue, really. But yeah, again, I mean, I hope it's good.
I think it
I
will
hope
be.
it all turns out great and it's a good representation and it's
Yeah.
not like the Killing Joke animated
Mhm.
adaptation that made me want to rip my eyes out, but
Oh no. Mm-mm.
it was fucking terrible.
Shivers.
Oh, it was terrible. But yeah, if you don't have any other thoughts on it, you know.
No, I think you hit a really good point.
I
Yeah,
let the optimist go first.
yeah. But you hit really good points about why
Yeah, and again, I
it is
love
a little iffy.
Buffy. You know, like I
Yeah,
love Buffy the
exactly.
Vampire Slayer. I don't have anything personally against Joss Whedon. I just think it's just a little odd that he would take not one but three roles.
Three rolls.
I could have
Just
gone to a
give a
woman.
little. Give a little.
Yeah. But on to the movies
Yes.
that we covered. I feel like I chose Faults out of like a panicked like we need one that we haven't seen before. And I wanted it to be one that none of us had seen before. And as is the case, I've seen a lot of these films, and I hadn't seen Faults. So Faults is edited by Sarah Beth Shapiro, and it's an odd film to describe without like a synopsis in front of me, which was my poor decision making. But essentially, it's about an investigator who's also trying to bring people back from cults. Right?
Mm-hmm. Cults. Yep.
Is that like a bare bones explanation? It's not what you expect it's going to be. But
on the surface, it's very one film, and then you just dig a little bit deeper, and it's something completely different. You think it's gonna kind of be this comedy that makes you feel uncomfortable and like the nervous laughter kind of way.
Yeah.
But it ends up being kind of it's kind of masterful in the way that it transforms into a different film, I think.
No, I agree, especially with the power dynamics between the two leading characters. And it stars Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who I absolutely adore.
And I want her
You want her to be Batgirl?
Yeah. It might be a reach, but just her in Scott Pilgrim was everything to me.
And 10 Cloverfield. She really would be great.
Fantastic.
Oh my god, I'm derailed now because I just think that's excellent. But I thought Faults was kind of almost like, and this is gonna sound like a detriment, but like a bargain bin Coen Brothers.
Yeah.
A little bit. It's like the dark, off-kilter humor, but it didn't have like the extreme artistry of the Coen Brothers, but it was really good still. It felt like a movie where a director was still kind of trying to figure themselves out, and it was directed by Riley Stearns. And yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I don't know if you wanted to share some of your general thoughts on the film.
Yeah.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I did enjoy it. I do agree with you in the fact that it felt a little bit hackneyed in some of the inspiration that it drew. And I usually like to kind of read up on what the inspiration behind films were, especially if it's written and directed by the same person. And in this case, it was Riley Stearns also wrote the screenplay, I believe, maybe with another person, but I know that he had a hand in it. It's interesting, he actually cited the Coen brothers, Fargo, as
really?
as a main inspiration, which is interesting. And then also, I think it was Paul Thomas Anderson, one of his works. So yeah, I agree in the fact that it can feel a little bit contrived in borrowing some of those elements, but I think taking a step back from that, it can kind of be charming in that like patchwork quilt kind of way of throwing some elements of different filmmakers together. I think my biggest comment on the film was its transformative nature from one film to another. And I often enjoy films that it's not just one note. It can kind of be, in this case, like a thriller-ish film that still makes you laugh. And I think the film in general, in terms of the acting and the script were really, it was really carried by the leads, Ansel and Claire, the two main characters. I do think, and also, I mean, John Grease as Terry was also fantastic. But yeah, so in terms of the stock film qualities, I think it was a nice film. Not as great as I had anticipated it to be in terms of just what I had heard about it. And I'm rambling now, but
no,
those are my main points.
It did have a bit of a cult following, it felt like, last year, so I kind of was pretty pumped on it as well. And I agree. It took like a half hour for me to really kind of get committed to it. I thought, for the sake of this podcast, it was an interesting pick, and especially because I feel like editing definitely plays a key purpose in this film. But yeah, I was kind of lukewarm on it too, but I did think that Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Leland Orser were terrific together. I thought they played off of each other remarkably. In fairness, here's my natural segue. Since the other film we wanted to focus on was Mad Max Fury Road,
yes,
edited by Margaret Sixel. It was a pretty hard thing to have to compare itself to.
Exactly.
Since it was magnificent and one of the best of the decade, and one is really interesting and really cool, but again is very definitely a director getting his footing, especially since Fault was Riley Stern's first feature-length film. But for Mad Max, I am 95% certain we'd both seen it before this month.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. So I'm curious, is this the first of the Mad Max saga that you'd seen?
Yes. And I had seen it when it came out in theaters in 2015. And I actually think it made my top 10 list of that year. And it actually might be on the site in our staff best movies list that we did.
I think the majority of our staff did. I think I might have one of the few who didn't, and not because I didn't love it. It's just I think I loved a lot of movies that year that were a little bit more introspective.
Yeah, like Room, Carol, like it had some competition.
I also had like room for one blockbuster, and The Force Awakens totally edged itself in there.
Yeah,
towards the end of the year, but it's the first of the Mad Max saga that I'd seen, and I'm pretty sure it's how I'm going to keep it, mainly because of my general disdain of Mel Gibson. But I didn't know if you had interest in seeing the rest after seeing Fury Road.
I think I'm more interested in seeing what comes after rather than diving into anything that comes before it. And I know that it has a very rich history through kind of all aspects of entertainment. But yeah, I think that I agree with you in sticking to this is the starting point. And then if anything kind of sparks my interest afterward, I definitely would.
Definitely. I'm more interested. Furiosa is definitely a driving point of my intrigue.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if I would have loved it as much without her as a leading character. I would have been able to appreciate it. I don't think I would have been as emotionally connected, so to speak. But yeah, I figured we'd both seen it, but I wanted to double check. So as we've mentioned a couple of times, this is our episode on female editors, and I think it originally was Gabi's idea, and she's been kind of interested in the past in us exploring avenues of female minds and hands in the industry beyond just direction, or at least beyond movie direction. So I thought it was a really interesting idea too, and I like highlighting them, but I have to ask you, because I was realizing while I was watching this that my editing skills or my editing detection skills are not phenomenal. Is it something you notice in film, or do we only notice it when it's really, really good, or when it's really, really bad?
Yeah, I think that I'm kind of on the same page as you in terms of the way that we approach a film. It's more, how is it acted? How is it directed? Is the script great? You know, is the pacing all right? And then editing is kind of down with maybe score and like lighting and things like that. And that's not to undermine the importance of any aspect of filmmaking, but at least kind of our background and the way that we enter into a film.
And is there a technical aspect that you think you notice more? Like, because for me, like, if like sometimes the cinematography of a trailer will hook me immediately. Likewise, a score can make or break a film for me. Like, if I remember a moment based on the score, like, it completely heightens the film experience for me. Yeah. So it's not like we don't have specific eyes or ears for technical aspects. It's just that editing for me, I feel like takes a different level of it. Like, I know there's some writers for the young folks, such as my friend Evan, who editing is a big thing for him.
Huge. Yeah.
Like, and well, I'm watching, and again, unless it's really good, like I saw a documentary last year called Camera Person, and it was about all of the kind of archival footage that this woman had picked up on throughout the years of being a documentarian. And the editing there was beautiful, and you picked up on it because of the way, like, one shot from some completely separate, isolated moment like led into another one, like, you know, how she connected these random moments in life together through the editing, and it made sense then. But so for Faults, I feel like I noticed it in the sense that, like, how they edited it to start showing Claire being in the power position instead. Like, I thought that's how I noticed it in Faults. I don't know if you noticed it specifically in Faults or Mad Max though.
Yeah, I think with Faults, the editing, at least to me, I know that I don't really have the brains for editing. It's not, it takes a lot. It has to be kind of like glaringly bad for me to be like, okay.
Sure.
But I think with Faults, it was a lot more subtle. And since I was going into it, kind of trying to pay attention to the editing, I mean, I did notice specific, frame changes and the way that things were angled, and, the pacing of it kind of was sped up a little bit as the film progressed. But with Mad Max, I think it was more an immersive experience. It was about the visuals just as much as it was about the story. And I think that is where the difference lies. It's one was very subtle, and one it was really in the forefront.
And for Mad Max, I feel like what's interesting too is the way that they use editing to literally push the audience forward with the characters. Since, the first half is essentially a long road chase or car chase, and it means that you can never kind of relent that momentum. And that's where I feel like editing can be so crucial from my limited knowledge. Again, let me add like 10 disclaimers about this. But that's where it seems like it comes into play a lot, especially for action films, is like, good editing, bad editing can greatly impact the effective nature of an action scene. And I think, I know a lot of people complain about Marvel because of all the quick cutting and edits that happen to make like one scene that could be one shot 10 shots. And that's what I think works so well in Mad Max, is the fact that there's this flow to it.
Yeah.
Where you feel like you're never stopping going on that ride.
Yeah. It was very artful. And I think action films, they are very susceptible to bad editing. And I'm going to bring up the infamous Suicide Squad here. But that's an example where the fun of editing in an action movie, in a superhero movie, like you said, chopping up a single sequence into 10 different like shots from different angles. It's I think for me, it's part of the fun. But it can go just really, really wrong. And with Mad Max, it never went wrong, because I think it took a turn away from kind of being a little bit too intense, and turning it into something, like you said, that it doesn't relent. it just keeps you hooked in a way that at least I haven't seen in a film of this intense action caliber in quite a long time. And I don't think that I'll see something as good in this like kind of arena as Fury Road.
Sure. No, I agree. Yeah. I agree with that. I'm trying to think if there was anything more on that aspect, because essentially we're asking everybody to forgive us if we use the wrong terminology.
Yes, please.
This is a long way around it.
I'm not an editing master by any means.
But do you think moving forward, like, is editing something you like want to pay more attention to, or do you think it's kind of like, or maybe just because we're realizing just how many female editors there are out there compared to how few female directors there are, and how kind of ridiculous it is that, you know, women literally have like a final say in piecing together a movie.
Yeah, I think
but yet
they're
still uncredited.
So like,
I don't. Go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree in the fact that I had no idea that so many films were kind of down to women. And anybody listening will have to forgive kind of, I guess, my ignorance. And I didn't know that Mad Max Fury Road was edited by a woman until we kind of were talking about this month's theme. And when I kind of dove into it, I was like, wow, a lot of films that are praised for certain aspects, that's because of a woman. I got so excited I started to stutter. But yeah, it's kind of crazy how it's like this film is so lauded for the way that it's pieced together, and that's because of a woman that, you know, and I don't speak for everyone, but the fact that I didn't know who she was, it's kind of
exactly.
It's like I want to know more. Show me more. Give me more female editors.
No, I know. Or it makes the discrepancy though between female editors and female directors so much more ridiculous or remarkable. I don't know what the right way to put it, but
both.
I'm gonna kind of jump around here because, you know, directors like Joss Whedon, Jason Reitman, Jeff Nichols all use female editors quite a bit. But also probably the most famous pairing is Thelma Schoonmaker and Martin Scorsese, who've teamed up throughout his entire career. And so many of his films look and feel the way that they do because of her. And it makes me think, you know, how many Scorsese films have we seen? You know, I've seen probably only like 6 or 7 because his career and the longevity of his career is nuts. But like, just to know that all of those have such a specific feeling to them without losing that Scorsese edge, and how much of that is attributed to her. So I don't know, it's just kind of a thought, but more than really a talking point. But yeah, it makes me curious, you know. It makes me want to kind of see the editing process, because I linked to an article just for our notes, but I'll link to it in the description of this post as well. But Little White Lies did an article about why women make better film editors, or why do they. And I think it's interesting how editing is perceived, or was perceived at the dawn of kind of Hollywood's creation, as more women friendly. But it was seen as such because they were pushed out of the directing field in the first place. So I don't know if we want to talk about that and why it might be seen as a more women-friendly role than a director. Is it because it's more behind the scenes and not put into a leadership position? Or in the article they talk about how it was literally like stitching together one scene to the next. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on it. It's kind of a vague, open-ended question I just led you into.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. It actually ties into a point that I was going to bring up. So this is great. I had read that Margaret Sixel, she, I believe it's her husband, George Miller, he's a director, and she had mentioned that he views her editing as something positive, which obviously it is. But she actually doesn't consider gender kind of relevant to the editing process. There was an interview she did with Huffington Post where she said, I work with a lot of men in the cutting room, and they don't think about the fact that she's a woman. And she said, I'm really into cutting film. And while George, her husband, likes to think it's a positive, I don't feel very female about it. You've got to want it, and you've got to like sitting in front of a computer. And I think that's where it kind of connects to the fact that it is more of a women-friendly zone, because you're behind the computer. You're sitting on the cutting room floor. You're not walking around the set. You're not saying, here's how I'd like you to do this. It's not necessarily a take charge kind of role. And I'm kind of putting quotes around that, because I do think that editing is very, very important. But when it's compared to the caliber of directing, where you're more obviously and blatantly kind of giving direction and saying, this is how I want it, where editing, it's just as important, but it's a little bit more passive.
Yeah, so it makes you just question, like, did Hollywood kind of push women into those roles, And not to say that editing isn't crucial. Like, like we've said, it can make or break a film, but it's just interesting, I guess, to look into the historical nature of Hollywood and look at the female pioneers that came out of the first couple of decades, and then how, it seems like they almost got pushed further and further into the background in the technical aspect. And it's just interesting, I guess. And I guess, for women in Hollywood who have made it, they almost have to think of it as a non-gender issue. Anyway.
Yeah.
Because that's how you kind of withhold, or it's how you keep a hold of your position. But
yeah,
it makes
kind of
me want to take
agency.
Definitely. And it just makes me want to take kind of more of an active interest in the technical aspects and how many people are working behind the scenes that are women, because I can only assume it's still a pretty wide margin between women and men. But the fact that this is somewhere where there's actually a pretty large amount of women in the field just makes me interested. I'll have to read even more on it now after doing this, because this discussion has probed me to kind of want to continue looking. But
yeah,
I don't know if you had some thoughts that you wanted to talk about, correct? Unless we did naturally manage to bring them up.
we hit basically everything. Kind of just talking about gender in editing, and it's kind of making me question: do I put too much stock in directors? And is it because we've kind of been pushed to believe that the director is the most important thing in a film because it's like a male-dominated thing? I don't know, but
I think it depends.
Yeah.
Like, I think there is the whole auteur thing, where a Martin Scorsese film is very much a Martin Scorsese film.
Yeah.
Same with who we're going to be talking about soon, but a Sofia Coppola film is very much her own being too. But I do think, good editing, good score, good acting can only elevate a bad film so much. I do think a good director can turn something great out of weaker elements.
Yeah, out of a garbage.
He does have that control. Yeah, right. Yeah. Because they do have that control over everything. But I do think more and more that everything is a layer on something else that somebody else made. A great film is because every element was there. It wasn't just because the Coen brothers directed it, or I'm just going to mention the same people again, so everybody gets my point. But it depends, I think, totally on ground up. Like, was everything good at the beginning, and did it just continue to grow stronger with every new technological element that was added to it? And God forbid you have bad actors, because everything's tanked.
Unless
I guess you have a wonderful editor. So kudos to you. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think that was pretty much it. Kind of just
Look at
hitting
that.
the points. Yeah.
Look how succinct we were. I'm trying to make sure. Again, this was kind of a learning experience.
It was eye-opening. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it'll make me kind of, when I look at IMDb going forward about who made this, I'll definitely be scrolling down to the editor and talking earlier about the certain elements of a film that I'm drawn to. This will make me actively pursue not just editors but females, film composers. There are so few people, and I have a big playlist of my favorite movie scores because I'm a nerd, and there's so few. So that and editors will be the new thing that I kind of keep an eye out. But
yeah. And if you guys have any suggestions, if there are any female editors or composers that you're like, I love this girl,
right?
Send them our way so we can.
To us. Any articles that you found interesting that we didn't find already in our search, or what movie was edited to the degree that you think it made a difference? What movie was great, or what movie made you interested in the editing process, I suppose. So definitely let us know at either our individual Twitters at Allison AJ, or it's at AJ _
Caulfield. Yep.
Caulfield, right? Okay. Or at Finding Her Voice. And in that respect, thank you all for listening. In April, we'll be talking about Sofia Coppola films, which I am really excited about. I think I've seen all of them.
I am so jazzed.
So we haven't really, I think, talked about specific films we're going to talk about yet, or if we're going to kind of talk about her career as a whole. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more amongst ourselves and then tweet it out to people. But essentially, if you have thoughts on Sofia Coppola, please just share them with us whenever, because she's genuinely one of my favorite directors, period. I love her films. So yeah, we're just going to kind of talk about her career and looking ahead. We're going to be talking about female blockbuster films in May. In June, I think we're going to be talking about Wonder Woman pretty primarily.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of interesting things coming up, and thank you again for listening. We have a lot of fun doing these. Like we said, you can find us at our Twitters, Finding Her Voice. You can find us at TYF Official, at theyoungfolks.com. We're at iTunes. Like us, review us, rate us. We love positive feedback, though, the most.
Give us validation. Just kidding.
Yeah, we need it. No, we're writers. But yeah, I think that's it. Is that it?
Yeah, I think we hit all the points.
Yay! Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one. Where's my stop button? There.